Hello, welcome to Story Hour with Miss Barbara. This is a story about bears, but it may give you a way of looking at bears that you haven't experienced before. It comes from the Tlingit Native American people of Alaska, and this is one of their myths. So there was once a man of the Raven clan. He lived in a large village, but he was very lonely and sad because he had lost all of his family and his friends. And he just didn't seem like he could go on living as he always had. But he thought paddling away to a different village would be difficult because the people there would wonder why he left his village. Was he being chased away for some evil like witchcraft? So he didn't think that would work. And in the end, he just went off into the forest. And as he was walking alone in the forest, he thought, I'll just let the bears finish me off. So there was a salmon creek that ran near their village, and he found one of the trails that the bears took down to the creek. And he laid himself across that trail, and he waited for the bears to come. And after a time, he heard the bushes break, and there was a whole line of bears coming towards him with the biggest one in the lead. And this one had white tips at the end of his whiskers. And suddenly the man was very frightened. And the thought of getting mauled to death by a bunch of bears was not very appealing. And he realized that he had made a big mistake. So when the bear came up to him, he looked up and said, I have come to invite you to a feast. And then, when all the hairs on the bear went straight up, he thought, this is it. This is the end for me. But he just said again, I've come to invite you to a feast. And if you want to kill me, that's all right, because I'm all alone. I have nothing left, no property, no children, no wife. And then suddenly the bear growled something to his followers, and they all turned around and walked back into the forest. And then the man got up quickly and went back to his village. But as he was going back, he thought, I wonder if they left because the leader told them that they were coming to a feast. So he decided he should get ready for this feast, just in case. So he cleaned away all the old sand from around his fireplace and put new sand there. And then he went out and got some firewood. But when he told the people of his village what he had done, they were aghast. They were saying, are you crazy? You can't have a bunch of grizzly bears in your house. But he continued with his preparations anyway. And the next morning, he did the final preparation. He painted some red stripes on his arm, and then he painted a red stripe over his heart, and then one across his chest. And then he went to his door, he looked out. He noticed that all the villagers had gone inside their houses and locked the doors. And he looked towards the creek and he waited. And after a while, sure enough, there were the bears coming up from the creek to his house. So he invited them in, and he seated them all in a circle with the chief bear next to the fireplace. And then he served his feast. He had cranberries marinated in grease, and after those had made the rounds, he passed around some salmon that was sprinkled with clover and dandelion greens. And then he had some deer meat with pine nuts, and for dessert, raspberries and honey. And after the bears had finished eating, the chief bear began growling, but it seemed to the man that he was talking to him. Because every once in a while he'd look up at the smoke hole and just had this look about him that he was saying something important. And when he finished, he got up and he walked over to the man and he licked some of the paint off of his chest. And then each bear got up and followed him out, and on the way out, they too licked some of the paint off of him. And he felt like they were licking away his sadness. The next day, the smallest of the bears came back to see him, but he was now in a human form, and he was speaking their native language. And he explained to the man that he had once been human, but he had been captured by the bears and adopted by them. And he asked him, "Did you know what the chief of the bears was saying to you yesterday?" And the man said, "No." And he said, "Well, he was telling you that he too has lost all of his loved ones. And he heard of you before he met you. And he just wants you to know that whenever you feel sad, to think of him because he knows how you feel." And then the man asked him, "Why didn't you tell me all this yesterday at the feast?" And he said, "Because I'm forbidden to speak my native language when the chief of the bears is around." And then he left. And so it was after that, ever after, that the people of this man's village were affected by this visit. Because whenever they killed a bear, they would always paint the flesh of the bear with this red cross. And whenever they had a feast, they would invite an enemy to the feast. And by the end of the feast, they would be friends with that enemy, just as the man became friends with the bears. So that's the story of the man who entertained bears. I hope you enjoyed this story, and thanks for listening.